Sometimes the hardest thing about running away is realizing you can never outrun yourself. After 10 years alone in the mountains, Rowdy Elkins walked into a desert town for a tent and left with a storage unit full of her past. Inside were journals, maps, tools, and a box marked with initials that made her blood run cold. L.E., the man she'd left behind decades ago. She thought she'd buried that life under miles of wilderness and silence, but someone knew where she was. Someone had been waiting. As Rowdy sifted through the dust and memories, one question haunted her. Was this really random luck, or had she just walked into a trap? What was she supposed to find in that storage unit? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Cascade Backcountry had been Rowdy Elkins' home for nearly a decade, and in all that time, she'd grown to understand its language better than any human tongue. The way Douglas fir branches whispered warnings before a storm. How the creek's pitch changed when snowmelt turned to autumn trickle. The particular snap of a twig that meant deer, not danger. At 58 years old, with silver threading through her sun-darkened braid and lines carved deep around her eyes, she moved through the wilderness with the efficiency of someone who'd long ago stopped questioning her place in it. Her camp sat tucked into a natural alcove on the eastern slope of the northern Cascades, sheltered by an overhang of granite and screened by thick stands of western hemlock. A tarp stretched between trees created her roof, beneath which she'd arranged her life with military precision. A sleeping bag on a raised platform to avoid ground cold. A small cook station with a propane burner she refilled twice yearly. Storage bags suspended from branches to keep food away from bears. And a rain collection system that fed into recycled water jugs. Everything she owned fit into 2 large backpacks and a rucksack that had traveled more miles than most people's cars. She'd learned to live small, to need little, to find satisfaction in simplicity that most folks couldn't fathom. Morning meant boiling creek water for coffee, instant, bitter, perfect. Breakfast was oatmeal with whatever she'd foraged. Huckleberries in late summer, pine nuts in fall, dried apple slices from her solar dehydrator in winter. The rhythm of her days followed the sun, not a clock. She hiked, she gathered, she maintained her gear. She read from the handful of paperback westerns that made the rotation, their spines cracked and pages soft as cloth. People assumed solitude meant loneliness, but they were wrong. Rowdy had chosen this. After everything that came before, the noise, the complications, the weight of another person's eyes always on her, the silence of the mountains felt like medicine. She talked to herself sometimes, narrating tasks like she was teaching an invisible student. Check your nuts twice, especially the bear bag. Lazy hands make for hungry nights. Her voice had grown rough from disuse, scratchy like wind through pine needles. But even the most carefully constructed life couldn't hold back forever. Winter was coming early this year. She could feel it in her bones and see it in the way the marmots had already gone to ground by mid-September. Her propane was low. Her boots, resoled twice already, were finally giving up their ghost. And her supply of basics, salt, flour, the antibiotics she kept for emergencies, had dwindled to nearly nothing. The decision to go into town felt like betrayal somehow. As if by leaving, even temporarily, she was admitting that her self-sufficiency had limits. But practicality outweighed pride. She'd heard about Mercy Flats from a hiker she'd briefly guided back to the trail 3 summers ago. Small desert town, the hiker had said, couple hours south and west from the mountains. The kind of place where people minded their business and a woman could resupply without drawing attention. The hike down took her 2 days. She moved through elevation zones like passing through chapters of a book. Alpine meadow, giving way to dense forest, then to scrubby foothills, finally to the sage-dotted flatlands that shimmered with heat even in October. The temperature climbed with each descending mile. By the time she reached the valley floor, she'd stripped down to a thin flannel shirt, her thermal layers stuffed in her pack. Mercy Flats announced itself with a sun-bleached sign pocked with bullet holes. Population 847, founded 1952, drive carefully. The main street stretched 2 blocks long, lined with the stubborn businesses that survived in small western towns. A diner, a gas station, a hardware store, a post office sharing space with a real estate office, and at the far end, a storage facility with Mercy Storage, climate-controlled units available, painted across its corrugated metal side. Rowdy felt exposed the moment she walked onto that sidewalk. After years of forest canopy and mountain walls, the open sky pressed down on her like a hand. The buildings felt too close together. A truck rumbled past and she flinched at the noise. 3 teenagers clustered outside the gas station looked up from their phones, registering her appearance. Dusty boots, worn canvas pants, the kind of deep tan that came from living outdoors, and a wariness in her posture that marked her as other. She'd planned to hit the hardware store first, but her throat felt like sandpaper. The diner called to her with its promise of air conditioning and running water. A bell jangled when she pushed through the door, and conversations stuttered to a brief halt before resuming. Rowdy chose a stool at the counter, keeping her back to the wall habit. The man behind the counter was maybe 65, with a barrel chest, forearms thick as fence posts, and shrewd eyes that took in everything without seeming to stare. His name tag read Gil. "Coffee?" he asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please." Her voice came out rougher than intended. He poured, set down the cup, and slid over a laminated menu without comment on her appearance or obvious unfamiliarity with town. Rowdy appreciated that more than he could know. "The breakfast special's good until 2, he said. "Eggs, hash browns, toast. Or if you want something lighter, the soup today is chicken and rice. The special. Eggs over easy, and a water if you don't mind." "Not at all." He moved away to put in her order, and Rowdy wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. The diner smelled like decades of grease and coffee, underlaid with something sweeter, pie maybe, or cinnamon rolls. A radio played softly from the kitchen, some country station murmuring about lost love and dusty roads. Gil returned with her water in a plastic tumbler beaded with condensation. "Passing through or staying?" "Just resupplying. Heading back up to the mountains tomorrow or the next day." He nodded, no judgment in his expression. "You hike the PCT?" "Used to guide it. Now I just live up there, year-round. 10 years running." Something shifted in his face, a flicker of respect. "That takes some doing. Winter up there gets mean." "It does." Her food arrived, delivered by a younger woman, with tired eyes and quick hands. Rowdy ate slowly, savoring every bite. Fresh eggs felt like luxury after months of powdered substitutes. The hash browns were crispy and salted perfectly. She'd forgotten how good simple food could taste when someone else cooked it. She was mopping up the last of her eggs with toast when Gil returned, refilling her coffee without asking. "You hear about the storage auction?" Rowdy looked up. "What auction?" "Well, not an auction exactly. Raffle, I guess you'd call it. The storage facility down the street does it once a year. Any unit that's gone abandoned or unpaid, they raffle off the contents. Raises money for the volunteer fire department. Drawings this afternoon at 2. I'm not much for raffles. Didn't figure you were. But I mention it because this year they're doing something different. Anyone who's dropped money in the donation cans around town over the last year got automatically entered. No purchase necessary." He gestured to a coffee can by the register, decorated with hand-drawn flames and VFD in red marker. "Delia over at the storage place has been going around collecting all the cans, tallying up entries. Drawing names today." Rowdy had a vague memory from 3 years ago, one of her rare trips to the slightly larger town 40 miles north. She'd bought supplies and dropped her change in a donation can without thinking about it. The kind of automatic gesture you make when you've got 2 hands full of bags and a clerk's holding out a can. "Well, I won't be here for it," Rowdy said. "But it's a nice thing for the fire department." Gil smiled. "It is. Though between you and me, last year's winner got nothing but old magazines and a broken chair." You never know what people leave behind in those units. She paid her bill, leaving a generous tip that still only amounted to a few dollars, and stepped back into the afternoon heat. The hardware store yielded propane, salt, a sewing kit for her gear, and a pair of boot insoles. She was examining a used backpacking tent in decent condition, thinking it might be time to replace her tarp setup, when her phone, a basic flip model she kept charged with a solar battery and turned on maybe once a month, buzzed in her pocket. The number was unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer, but something made her flip it open. "Hello? Is this Rowdy Elkins?" A woman's voice, bright and businesslike. No one had called her Rowena in a decade. She'd gone by Rowdy since her trail guide days, a nickname that stuck because of her untamed hair and tendency to lead groups on ambitious routes. "Who's asking?" "This is Delia from Mercy Storage. I'm calling because you're the winner of our annual storage raffle. Congratulations." Rowdy's hand tightened on the phone. "I think you have the wrong number. I didn't enter any raffle." "Well, that's the beauty of it this year. Anyone who donated to the volunteer fire department cans was automatically entered. We pulled your name about 20 minutes ago. You donated at Miller's General Store up in Ridgeline, August of 2022. Do you remember?" She did. Vaguely. She'd been buying medical supplies and had dropped coins in a can decorated with construction paper flames. "I remember donating, but I didn't know that you'd be entered." "That's okay. It's all legitimate, I promise. You can come by any time this week to claim your unit. I'll need to see an ID, get you to sign some papers, but then it's all yours. Unit 37. Been paid up through last month, then the owner stopped. We're required to try to contact them, but after 90 days, we can redistribute the contents." Rowdy's mind spun. She didn't need a storage unit. She needed to get back to the mountains before snow closed the higher passes. "What's in it?" "Can't say. Against the rules to open it before the winner takes possession. But it's a 10 by 10, and it's full. Likely some good stuff. Could be worth your while to at least take a look." Against every instinct that told her to hang up, to walk away, to forget this strange bit of luck and return to her mountain solitude, Rowdy heard herself say, "I'll stop by before I leave town." "Wonderful. We're open until 5 today, then 9 to 5 tomorrow. Just ask for me, Delia, and again, congratulations." The call ended. Rowdy stood in the hardware store aisle, staring at the phone like it might explain itself. She didn't believe in luck or fate, or any of the things people said when random chance happened to line up in their favor. But something about this felt off, like a snare hidden under leaves. Still, curiosity was a powerful thing. Mercy Storage sat at the edge of town, a collection of metal-sided buildings arranged in rows behind a chain-link fence. The office was a small prefab structure with window air conditioning units that rattled like dice in a cup. Inside, a woman in her 40s sat behind a desk cluttered with papers, a computer that looked a decade old, and several mugs of coffee in various stages of consumption. "You must be Rowena," she said, standing with a smile. Delia was round-faced and warm, the kind of person who probably knew everyone's business and kept most of it to herself. "I'm so glad you came by. Let me get the paperwork started." The forms were simple enough: proof of ID, a waiver releasing the storage company from liability for the contents, a signature confirming she understood the unit was sold as is. Rowdy signed everything with her given name, the letters feeling foreign under her pen. "All right then." Delia pulled a key from a labeled hook on the wall. "Unit 37 is in the back row, all the way at the end. You can prop the door open if you want to sort through things, or you can take it all at once. Some folks rent a truck. Up to you. Can I ask who the previous owner was?" Delia hesitated, glancing at her computer screen. "Name on the account is just initials. L.E., no full name listed, which is odd. But the payment came through a trust account, so it was all legal. Paid like clockwork for 15 years, then stopped. We tried contacting the trust, but the address was defunct. L.E. The letters hit Rowdy like cold water. Her vision narrowed. She must have made some sound, because Delia leaned forward, concerned. "You okay? You need to sit down?" "I'm fine." The words came automatically, but her hands were shaking. She closed them into fists. "Just give me a minute. Take your time." But time wouldn't help, because Rowdy knew exactly who Ellie was, Leonard Emmett. The man she'd disappeared from 30 years ago. The man she'd spent a decade in the wilderness trying to forget. And somehow, impossibly, she'd just won a storage unit full of his things. The walk to Unit 37 felt like crossing a desert. Rowdy's boots scuffed against gravel, each step carrying her closer to a past she'd worked so hard to bury. The October sun beat down on the corrugated metal buildings, turning the narrow aisles between units into heat traps. Sweat trickled down her spine, though she couldn't tell if it was from temperature or dread. The unit sat at the far end of the row, its orange roll-up door marked with faded numbers, 37. Rowdy stood before it, key in hand, and tried to steady her breathing. This could be nothing. Coincidence. Maybe someone else with the same initials. Maybe Leonard had rented this unit decades ago for reasons that had nothing to do with her. But she didn't believe in coincidences anymore. The key slid into the padlock with a soft click. She twisted it, felt the mechanism give, and pulled the lock free. Her hands moved to the door handle, and she hesitated one more time before hauling the door upward. Metal scraped against metal loud in the afternoon quiet. And then the space opened before her. The smell hit her first, dust and old paper, canvas and leather, the faint chemical scent of developing fluid. Everything inside was organized with obsessive precision. Plastic storage bins stacked along the left wall, each one labeled in neat block letters. Camping equipment hung from hooks on the right side, coils of rope, climbing harnesses, an ice axe, snowshoes. A wooden workbench occupied the back wall, its surface empty except for a leather satchel and a cardboard box. The box bore a label in permanent marker. Property of Ellie. Rowdy's legs felt unsteady. She stepped into the unit, and the temperature dropped several degrees in the shade. Her shadow stretched across the concrete floor, reaching toward that box like an accusation. She moved to the workbench, her hands hovering over the cardboard flaps. Part of her wanted to walk away right now, to leave this door open and disappear back into the mountains, where Leonard Emmett was nothing but a name she'd escaped. But another part, the part that had survived by understanding her threats, by staying alert, by never underestimating what people could do, that part needed to know. She opened the box. Journals. At least a dozen of them. Bound in leather and canvas, their covers worn smooth by handling. Beneath them, photographs in plastic sleeves. Maps folded and refolded so many times the creases had nearly torn through. A stack of letters bound with twine, and at the very bottom, something that made her breath catch. A Polaroid camera, vintage and well-maintained. Rowdy lifted the top journal with shaking hands. The cover was soft brown leather, the kind that darkened with age and use. She opened it to the first page, and there, in handwriting she'd once known as well as her own, were the words, "Field Journal, Summer 1994, Observations and Documentation." The summer she met him. She sank down onto an overturned crate, the journal heavy in her lap. Her finger traced the date of the first entry, June 3rd, 1994. 2 weeks before their first conversation on the trail near Mount Rainier. She began to read, arrived at Rainier NP today. Set up base camp at Cougar Rock. Weather clear, perfect for photography. Notice several trail guides working the visitor center. We'll observe schedules and routes over the next few days. The clinical language chilled her. She flipped forward, scanning entries. June 17th, made contact with R.E., trail guide approximately 28 years old, experienced. She led a group up to Panorama Point, strong leadership, knowledgeable about flora. Stayed back to photograph the group's return. She noticed me. Good, R.E., her initials. She kept reading faster now, watching her own life from 30 years ago unfold through Leonard's observing eyes. June 22nd, third conversation with R.E. She's more comfortable now. Laughs easily. Shared coffee at the lodge. She mentioned her apartment in Packwood, her schedule, 4 days on, 3 days off. Invited me to a local gathering next week. Will attend. July 8th, first date. Dinner at the steakhouse she recommended. She talked about her childhood in Montana, how she came to guiding, parents deceased, no siblings, limited local connections. Perfect, that last word, perfect, made Rowdy's stomach turn. She'd thought their courtship had been natural, organic, two people who loved the outdoors finding each other. But Leonard had been studying her, cataloguing her isolation, identifying her vulnerabilities. She flipped through pages, watching the entries grow more frequent, more detailed. He documented everything: what she wore, what she ate, who she talked to, the routes she guided, the days she stayed home. By August, the observations had shifted to something more possessive. August 29th, R mentioned that hiker, Jake something, asked for her number. She laughed it off, but I could see she was flattered. Need to be more present, more essential. She can't develop outside connections. September 15th, convinced R to move in with me. She was hesitant, wants to maintain independence, but I explained how much easier it would be. Split costs, share transportation, more time together. She agreed. Must ensure she remains focused on us, not her guide friends. Rowdy remembered that conversation. How Leonard had made it sound so reasonable, so practical. How she'd ignored the small voice in her head that whispered warnings. She'd been young and lonely, and he'd seemed like someone who understood her love of wilderness, who didn't try to cage her the way other men had. But the journals told a different story, one of systematic isolation, subtle manipulation. The slow tightening of a net she hadn't even realized she was in. She set down the first journal and picked up another, dated 1995. The year everything fell apart. January 12th, 1995. R is pulling away. She mentioned wanting to guide the PCT this summer, which would mean months apart. Unacceptable. Need to find a reason for her to stay. Perhaps a financial opportunity or a health concern. February 3rd, R went to lunch with old co-worker without telling me. Found out from Mark at the ranger station. Confronted her. She became defensive, said she didn't need to report her every movement. This independent streak needs correction. March 7th, major argument. R said she feels suffocated. Accused me of being controlling. She doesn't understand that I'm protecting her, protecting us. She's too naive to see how the world works, how people will take advantage. I'm the only one who truly cares. The entries grew darker, more erratic. Leonard's mask was slipping on the page, just as it had slipped in real life. Rowdy remembered those fights, how they'd escalated from discussions to shouting matches. How Leonard's eyes would go flat and cold when he was angry. How he'd punch walls, throw things, then cry and apologize and swear he'd never do it again. April 22. R is planning to leave. I can see it in her face, in the way she flinches when I touch her. She doesn't say it, but I know. She's been hiding money. Her backpack is packed and ready by the door, like she's preparing for a quick exit. She thinks I don't notice. She thinks she can just walk away from what we've built. April 28th. She's gone. Came home to an empty apartment. She took nothing but her hiking gear and clothes. Left a note, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Please don't try to find me." As if I would just let her disappear. As if she has any idea what I'm capable of. Rowdy's hands trembled so badly she had to set the journal down. That note. She'd agonized over every word, rewritten it a dozen times, trying to find language that would make him understand without provoking him. In the end, she'd left it on the kitchen table and walked out in the middle of the night while he was at a photography exhibition in Seattle. She'd hitchhiked to the Cascades, used cash to buy supplies, and vanished into the backcountry. Changed her name legally 6 months later. Moved her campsite every few weeks. Avoided towns, avoided people, avoided anything that might leave a trail Leonard could follow, and she'd thought she'd succeeded. But here was the evidence that she hadn't. This storage unit, paid for through a trust for 15 years. These journals documenting not just their relationship, but his continued obsession. Someone had known where to find her. Someone had ensured she'd win this raffle. Someone had wanted her to see these journals. Rowdy stood abruptly, the crate tipping over behind her. She moved to the plastic bins, yanking off lids. More journals. Photographs, hundreds of them, many featuring her. Trail maps with routes marked in red. newspaper clippings about missing hikers, a 3-ring binder labeled Search Documentation, her vision blurred. She pressed her palms against the workbench, trying to breathe through the rising panic. This wasn't just a storage unit. It was a shrine, a testament to Leonard's obsession, and someone had gift-wrapped it and handed her the key. The question was why. Rowdy grabbed the first journal and the box marked Property of LE, then walked out of the unit. She didn't bother closing the door or locking it. Let someone else deal with the rest. She needed air, space, distance from the evidence of how thoroughly Leonard had invaded her life. Back in the office, Delia looked up with a smile that faltered when she saw Rowdy's face. "Everything okay?" "The previous owner," Rowdy said, her voice flat. "Lee, do you know anything about them?" "Anything at all?" Delia's expression shifted to concern. "Just what I told you. The trust paid automatically." "Never met the person. Why? Is there a problem with the contents? Who set up the raffle? Who decided to do it this way this year?" "I did. I thought it would be a nice change from the usual auction. Get more community involvement." Delia's eyes narrowed. "You're scaring me a little. What's in that unit?" Rowdy realized she was gripping the journal so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She forced herself to relax. "Nothing. It's nothing. Just unexpected. Thank you for your time." She walked out before Delia could ask more questions. The sun was lower now, stretching shadows across the gravel lot. Rowdy's truck, an ancient Ford she kept parked at a friend's property during her mountain stays, sat where she'd left it that morning. She climbed in, set the journal and box on the passenger seat, and sat with her hands on the wheel. 10 years. She'd spent 10 years building a life where Leonard Emmett couldn't touch her, where his voice didn't echo in her decisions, where his presence didn't lurk around every corner. And in one afternoon, all of that carefully constructed peace had shattered. Someone knew who she was. Someone knew what Leonard had done. Someone had engineered this moment, bringing her face to face with a past she'd thought was dead and buried. The question that haunted her as she started the engine and drove toward the cheap motel at the edge of town was simple and terrifying. What did they want her to do with this information? And more importantly, were they watching to see what she'd do next? The Sunset Motel lived up to its name only in the sense that it faced west and had probably seen better days around the time the sun itself was younger. Rowdy paid cash for 3 nights, took the key to room 14, and locked herself inside with the journal and the box from the storage unit. The room smelled like cigarette smoke that no amount of air freshener could mask. A double bed with a sagging mattress dominated the space, flanked by a nightstand with a lamp that flickered when she turned it on. The carpet was an indeterminate brown color, and the bathroom tile had grout that might have once been white. But it had a lock on the door, and right now that was all that mattered. Rowdy sat on the bed, back against the headboard, and opened Leonard's journal to where she'd left off. Outside, the desert evening settled in with that particular quality of stillness that came when heat finally released its grip on the land. She could hear the distant hum of the highway, the occasional bark of a dog, the low murmur of a television through thin walls. She read, May 15th, 1995. Hired a private investigator. Cost more than I wanted to spend, but worth it. R has vanished completely. No credit card usage, no forwarding address, no contact with former employers. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. But everyone makes mistakes eventually. June 3rd, 1995. PI reports no leads. R's friends claim they haven't heard from her. I don't believe them. Went to Packwood, talked to people at the ranger station. They're protective of her. One man, older, weathered, told me to stop asking questions and go home. He knows something. July 22, 1995, breakthrough. A hiker mentioned seeing someone matching R's description on the PCT near Stevens Pass. Solo female, experienced, keeping to herself. Could be her. We'll drive up tomorrow to investigate. The entries continued like that for months, then years. Leonard had become consumed with finding her, tracking false leads across Washington and Oregon, interviewing hikers, checking trail registers, studying topographic maps. He'd spent thousands of dollars on private investigators. He'd driven hundreds of miles on rumors and speculation, and slowly, methodically, he'd begun to narrow down her location. March 8th, 1997. Pattern emerging. Multiple sightings of solo female hiker, late 20s, early 30s, in the northern Cascades. Always moving, never staying in one place long. Camps off trail. Avoids ranger stations. It's her. I know it's her. September 19th, 1998. Tracked her general area to a 20-mile radius in the backcountry east of Glacier Peak. She's living out there. Full time. The PI thinks I'm wasting my money, but he doesn't understand. She's mine. She'll always be mine. Distance doesn't change that. Rowdy's hands shook as she turned the pages. She'd thought she'd been so careful. She'd avoided towns, used cash for everything, never stayed anywhere long enough to establish a pattern. But Leonard had been patient, relentless. He'd treated finding her like a long-term project, gathering data points, analyzing patterns. Slowly closing in, a Polaroid photograph slipped from between pages and fell onto her lap. She picked it up, her breath catching. It was her, maybe 15 years ago, captured from a distance with a telephoto lens. She stood at the edge of a meadow, hand shading her eyes as she looked out over a valley. Her hair was longer then, her face less weathered, but it was unmistakably her. And she had no memory of that moment, no awareness that Leonard had been there, watching. She set the photo aside with trembling fingers and pulled more from the plastic sleeves in the box. Dozens of them. Her gathering water from a creek, her hanging a bear bag, her sitting by a campfire reading, her hiking along a ridge, backpack outlined against the sky. The photos spanned years. She could tell from the changes in her appearance, the different locations, the varying seasons. He'd found her, not once but repeatedly. He'd been tracking her, photographing her, documenting her life from afar. And she'd never known. The violation of it crashed over her like a wave. Her mountain sanctuary, the place she'd felt safest, had been compromised. How many times had Leonard stood in the trees, watching her sleep? How many of her private moments had he witnessed? The thought made her skin crawl. She forced herself to keep reading, to understand the full scope of what she was dealing with. October 12th, 2000. Found her campsite while she was away. Didn't disturb anything, don't want to spook her. But I photographed everything. Her setup is impressive. She's learned to live completely off-grid. Part of me is proud. I taught her to love the wilderness after all. The rest of me is angry that she's using those skills to hide from me. December 3rd, 2002. It's been almost 8 years. Sometimes I wonder if I should let her go. Move on, find someone else. But then I remember how perfect we were together, how much she needed me even if she didn't realize it. She's confused, scared. When I finally approach her, I'll have to be gentle, patient, show her that I've forgiven her for running, forgiven her, as if she'd done something wrong by escaping an increasingly abusive relationship, as if his obsession was somehow her fault. Rowdy stood abruptly, pacing the small room, her reflection caught in the mirror above the dresser. A woman in her late 50s, sun-weathered and trail-hardened, nothing like the young guide Leonard had fixated on 3 decades ago. But in his journals, she was frozen in time, forever the object of his possessive love. She returned to the box, digging deeper. Beneath the photographs, she found newspaper clippings, missing persons reports for women hikers, cold cases, articles about bodies found in the wilderness. Each one carefully dated and annotated in Leonard's handwriting. Doesn't match ours profile, wrong age range, possible but discovered too far south of her territory. Investigated. Not her. Relief. The pattern became clear and it turned her stomach. Leonard had been tracking every missing woman in the Pacific Northwest, cross-referencing with his knowledge of Rowdy's location, checking each case to see if she'd met with harm. The attention would be almost touching if it weren't so deeply disturbing. He'd been simultaneously hunting her and protecting her from his own imagination of dangers. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was another Polaroid. This one was different, older. It showed a much younger Rowdy, maybe 28, standing next to Leonard at a trail summit. His arm was around her shoulders, pulling her close. Her smile looked strained if you knew what to look for. His expression was one of absolute possession. She remembered that day. They'd hiked to Artist Point on Mount Baker. It had been early in their relationship, maybe 3 months in. Leonard had asked a passing hiker to take their photo, and she'd smiled because that's what you did for pictures. But even then, something in her had recognized the tightness of his grip, the way he angled her body toward his, the implicit message, mine. Rowdy turned the photo over. On the back, in Leonard's handwriting, R&L, August 1994, the beginning of everything. She set it down carefully, feeling the weight of all those years pressing against her chest. The beginning of everything. He'd been right about that, just not in the way he'd meant. That relationship had been the beginning of her understanding that love could be a trap, that kindness could mask control, that the person who claimed to want to protect you could be the greatest danger you'd face. And now, someone had collected all the evidence of Leonard's obsession and arranged for her to find it. The question was why? What did they want her to understand? What were they trying to tell her? Rowdy moved to the window, pulling back the thin curtain to look out at the parking lot. The sun had set fully now, leaving only the orange glow of streetlights and the neon flicker of the motel sign. A few cars sat scattered in parking spaces. No one moved in the shadows, but she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there someone was watching, waiting to see what she'd do with this information. Whether she'd run again, or whether she'd finally stand and face whatever truth was buried in that storage unit. She let the curtain fall and returned to the bed, to the journals, to the uncomfortable work of excavating a past she'd tried so hard to bury. Because one thing had become clear, this wasn't over. Leonard might be somewhere out there still searching, or he might be dead. But either way, someone else had picked up where he left off, and Rowdy needed to know who and why before they got any closer. Morning came too soon, announced by harsh sunlight through thin curtains and the rattle of a cleaning cart in the parking lot. Rowdy had barely slept, her mind churning through Leonard's journals until the words blurred together. She'd fallen into an uneasy doze around 4 in the morning. Still dressed, the final journal open beside her. She showered in the cramped bathroom, letting hot water sluice away the grit and exhaustion. The motel's water pressure was poor, but she stood under the lukewarm spray longer than necessary, trying to wash away the feeling of Leonard's eyes on her. It didn't work. The violation had seeped deeper than skin. The diner was busier at breakfast than it had been the previous afternoon. Rowdy chose the same counter stool, keeping her back to the wall. Gil noticed her immediately, his eyebrows rising slightly at her appearance. She probably looked as rough as she felt. Dark circles under her eyes, tension in her shoulders, a haunted quality she couldn't quite hide. "Coffee?" he asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please. And whatever's quick, pancakes are up." "I'll bring you a stack." He poured her coffee and moved away, giving her space. Rowdy appreciated the lack of questions. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stared at the counter, trying to organize her thoughts into something approaching a plan. She needed to go back to the storage unit. There were more journals, more photographs, more evidence of Leonard's years-long obsession. But more importantly, she needed to understand how all of this had ended up in Mercy Flats, hundreds of miles from where she and Leonard had lived. Who had paid for that unit for 15 years? Who had stopped paying just in time for it to go into raffle? And how had they ensured she'd win? The pancakes arrived, golden and steaming, with a side of bacon that Gil must have added without her asking. She ate mechanically, fueling her body for whatever came next. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on you," Gil said, refilling her coffee. The morning rush had subsided, leaving only a couple of truckers at a booth and an elderly woman reading a newspaper at a table by the window. "Just didn't sleep well. That motel'll do it. Rooms haven't been updated since Carter was president." He leaned against the counter, his posture casual but his eyes sharp. "You decide what to do with your storage unit winnings?" Rowdy met his gaze, still sorting through it. "Turns out it belonged to someone I used to know." "That's a hell of a coincidence. That's what I'm thinking." Gil studied her for a long moment. "You need help with anything, you let me know." I've been in this town long enough to know who's who and what's what. And I can tell when someone's in a situation that doesn't sit right. You used to be law enforcement. It wasn't a question. Rowdy had developed a sense for it over the years. The way certain people carried themselves, the way they observed, without seeming to stare. A slight smile crossed Gil's weathered face. Sheriff's deputy up in Idaho, retired 15 years back, moved here for the quiet. But old habits die hard. You've got the look of someone who's either running from something or about to run. Just want you to know you've got options. Rowdy nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind. After breakfast, she drove back to Mercy Storage. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day. Delia was in the office, looking less cheerful than she had yesterday. She glanced up when Rowdy entered, and her expression shifted to something guarded. You're back. I need to ask you some more questions about the previous owner. Delia set down her pen. Look, I don't know what you found in that unit, but after you left yesterday, I did some thinking. The whole situation felt off to me too. So I dug into the payment records a bit deeper. Rowdy's pulse quickened. What did you find? The trust that paid for the unit. It's called the Pacific Holdings Trust, set up through a law firm in Seattle. I called them this morning, said I needed to verify some information for our records. The woman I spoke with confirmed they'd been managing the unit payments since 2009, 15 years of automatic monthly withdrawals. Did she say who set up the trust? She couldn't disclose that without proper authorization. Client confidentiality. But here's where it gets interesting. Delia pulled a folder from her desk drawer. I went back through our old files. The paper ones from before we digitized everything. Found the original rental agreement from 2009. She slid a photocopy across the desk. The form was standard enough. Rental agreement for a 10x10 unit, paid monthly, climate controlled. The signature at the bottom was a cramped scrawl that could have been anything. But the name printed above it made Rowdy's blood run cold. Leonard Emmett. He rented it himself, Rowdy said quietly. Looks that way. But here's the thing. The Seattle law firm only started managing payments in 2009. Before that, according to our records, the payments came from different accounts. Different names. Like someone was moving money around to keep it anonymous. Delia tapped the folder. I've got records of at least 3 different payment sources in the first few years. Why would he do that? Can't say for sure, but if I had to guess, he was hiding something. Didn't want anyone, maybe not even you, to be able to trace the unit back to him easily. Rowdy thought about the journals, the photographs, the evidence of stalking that spanned decades. Leonard had been documenting his obsession, creating a record of everything. But he'd also been careful to keep it hidden, anonymous, protected. The storage unit was his secret archive. You said the payments stopped recently? 3 months ago, August. The law firm sent a notice saying the trust account had been closed and they wouldn't be making further payments. We sent them the required notices, waited the mandatory period, then added the unit to this year's raffle. Delia leaned forward. But here's what's really bothering me. The raffle was my idea. I came up with it back in July, before those payments stopped. I thought it would be a nice community thing. But the more I think about it, the more it feels like someone was counting on me to do exactly that. You think someone manipulated you? I think someone understood how small towns work, how storage facilities work. They stopped paying at just the right time, knowing we'd have to do something with the unit. And the donation system that was already in place from previous years. Anyone could have put money in those cans in your name, created entries for you. We don't track who donates, just the total amounts. Rowdy felt the pieces shifting, arranging themselves into a picture she didn't like. Someone orchestrated this. They wanted me to win. They wanted me to find what's in that unit. That's my read on it. Delia's expression was troubled. Which brings me to my next question. What exactly is in there that someone wants you to see so badly? Rowdy considered how much to reveal. But Delia had been honest with her, had done actual investigative work when she could have just handed over the key and moved on. She deserved at least a partial truth, evidence, Rowdy said carefully, of someone's obsession with me. Someone I left a long time ago because the relationship wasn't safe. He spent years trying to find me, documenting everything. Kept it all in that unit. Delia's eyes widened. Jesus, and now someone's made sure you found it. Why? That's what I need to figure out. You think he's still alive? Still looking for you? Rowdy shook her head. I don't know, but I need to find out who's been maintaining that trust and who decided to shut it down now. You said the law firm was in Seattle? Henshaw and Associates. On 4th Avenue. Delia wrote down the address and phone number on a sticky note. You call them, you tell them Delia from Mercy Storage authorized the inquiry for security reasons. That might get you a bit further than I got. Rowdy took the note, folding it carefully. Thank you. For doing this? You didn't have to. Yeah, well, I've got daughters. If someone was stalking them, keeping files on them, I'd hope somebody would help them figure out what the hell was going on. Delia stood, moved to the window that overlooked the storage facility. You be careful, okay? Whoever set this up, they've been patient. They've been smart. Those are the dangerous ones. Back at the unit, Rowdy forced herself to continue the inventory. She worked methodically, opening each plastic bin, cataloging contents. More journals spanning the years. Manila folders full of topographic maps, some with routes marked in red ink. A box of cameras, Leonard's professional photography equipment, expensive even by current standards, and then tucked into a leather satchel on the workbench. She found something that changed everything, an annotated trail map of the Pacific Crest Trail and surrounding wilderness, with red circles marking specific locations and dates. The circles clustered in the northern Cascades. Each one had a date written beside it in Leonard's precise handwriting. The earliest was from 1998. The most recent was from 2018, just 7 years ago. Long after she'd thought he'd given up searching, her hands trembled as she studied the map. The marked locations tracked her movements over 2 decades. Every place she'd stayed more than a few weeks. Every water source she'd used regularly. Every ridge she'd traversed. He'd been methodical, patient, building a pattern of her life in the wilderness, and someone had kept this map updated long after 2009, when the storage unit was rented, which meant either Leonard had been accessing this unit regularly, adding new intelligence, or someone else had been continuing his work. Rowdy photographed the map with her basic phone camera, the image quality poor but serviceable. Then she folded it carefully and added it to the box of evidence she was taking with her. As she worked, a shadow fell across the open unit door. She spun, heart hammering, hand instinctively reaching for the folding knife she kept clipped to her belt. Sheriff Paulson stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. Ms. Elkins, Delia mentioned you were out here. Mind if we talk for a minute? Rowdy forced her hand to relax, moving it away from the knife. Sheriff Paulson was mid-50s, with the kind of lean build that came from hard work rather than gym memberships. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, and he wore his authority quietly, the type who didn't need to announce his position because everyone already knew. Sheriff, she kept her voice neutral. What can I do for you? Just wanted to check in. Delia called, said you'd been asking questions about the previous owner of this unit. Mentioned you seemed pretty shaken up yesterday. He glanced past her at the open bins, the scattered contents, the evidence of Leonard's obsession spread across the concrete floor. Looks like you found something worth being shaken about. It's personal. Old history I thought was behind me. Paulson nodded slowly. That's usually when history decides to resurface, right when you think you're done with it. He paused, then added, Mind if I come in? Rather not have this conversation where everyone passing by can hear. Rowdy stepped aside, and he entered the unit, his boots scuffing against the concrete. He surveyed the contents with a lawman's eye, taking in the organized bins, the hanging equipment, the journals and photographs. His expression remained professionally neutral, but she could see him making calculations, drawing conclusions. Someone put a lot of effort into this, he said finally. Someone put a lot of effort into tracking my life without my knowledge or consent. That's what I figured. He turned to face her fully, which is why I wanted to give you a heads up. 2 weeks ago we got a phone call at the station. Someone asking about a woman matching your description. Mid to late 50s, likely came down from the mountains, probably not local. The caller claimed to be an old friend trying to reconnect. Rowdy's stomach dropped. Did you get a name? They hung up before we could get details. Call came from a burner phone, traced to a cell tower just outside Mercy Flats. We logged it as a welfare check inquiry and moved on. We get those sometimes. People looking for family members who might have passed through. But now, with you winning this storage unit and all of this, he gestured at the evidence around. In them, it's starting to feel less like coincidence, and more like somebody set up a whole production. When exactly was the call? October 18th. Wednesday afternoon around 3. Rowdy's mind raced. 2 weeks ago. Right around the time Delia would have been finalizing the raffle details, confirming entries. Someone had been checking to make sure she was in the area, making sure their plan would work. What did they sound like? Man or woman? Dispatcher said the voice was muffled, hard to tell. Could have been either. They asked if we'd seen anyone fitting your description, if you'd checked in anywhere, caused any trouble. When our dispatcher asked why they were looking, they said it was a personal matter and hung up. And you're just telling me this now? Paulson's expression hardened slightly. I'm telling you now because now there's context. A random inquiry about a woman who might be in town is one thing. That same woman winning a storage unit full of stalker materials is another. I don't like puzzles in my jurisdiction, Miss Elkins, especially ones that might involve someone's safety. Rowdy couldn't fault his logic. She took a breath, trying to decide how much to share. The person who rented this unit, Leonard Emmett, he was someone I was in a relationship with 30 years ago. It ended badly. He became obsessive, controlling. I'd left without warning and spent the last decade in the backcountry specifically so he couldn't find me. But he found you anyway. It wasn't a question. Paulson was looking at the trail map, the photographs, the documentation of years of surveillance. Apparently, I didn't know it at the time, but yes, he tracked me. She gestured at the evidence. All of this is his. His journals, his photographs, his records. Someone arranged for me to win this unit to find all of this. I don't know if it's Leonard himself or someone working on his behalf. When's the last time you had contact with him? In 1995, April, the night I left. Paulson pulled out a small notebook, jotting down information. You have a full name? Date of birth, if you remember it. Leonard James Emmett. Born March 14th, 1962. Last known address was in Packwood, Washington, but that was 3 decades ago. I'll run it through the system, see what comes up. Criminal record, current address, vital records. If he's out there, we'll find him. He tucked the notebook away. Meanwhile, I want you to be careful. Whoever made that phone call knows you're in town. They might be watching to see what you do with all of this. I know. Rowdy met his eyes. I spent 10 years learning to watch my back, Sheriff. I'll keep doing it. After Paulson left, Rowdy continued her inventory with renewed urgency. She worked through the remaining bins, finding more of the same, maps, journals, photographs. Leonard's obsession had been thorough and well documented. But she was looking for something specific now, any indication of who else might have been involved. Any hint that Leonard had help or that someone had continued his work after him. In the third to last bin, she found it. A shoebox containing cassette tapes. Old-fashioned audio cassettes in plastic cases, each one labeled with a date. The dates ranged from 2010 to 2020, a decade of audio records, all created after the storage unit had been rented. Rowdy stared at the tapes, her pulse thrumming in her ears. Leonard's journals had ended in the early 2000s. She'd read through enough of them to know the writing became less frequent, more sporadic, as years passed. But these tapes suggested he'd continued documenting, just in a different format. She needed to hear what was on them. Back at the motel, Rowdy stopped at the front desk. The clerk was a young man in his 20s, absorbed in his phone. He barely glanced up when she approached. You got a cassette player I could borrow? She asked. He blinked. A what? Cassette player. For audio tapes? No. I mean, I don't think so. That's like old technology, right? Rowdy suppressed a sigh. Right, thanks anyway. The diner was her next stop. Gil took one look at her expression and poured coffee without being asked. "Need another favor," she said. "Name it." "You got a cassette player? Or know where I might find one?" Gil's eyebrows rose, but he didn't ask why. "Got one at home. Shoebox full of old country tapes I haven't had the heart to throw out. Bring it by tomorrow morning? Tonight, if possible. I'll pay you for the trouble." Something in her tone must have conveyed the urgency. Gil studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Give me an hour. I'll drop it by the motel. Room 14, right? You're a good man, Gil. Just don't let it get around." "Bad for my reputation." She managed a weak smile and returned to her room to wait. The hour stretched long. She organized the evidence she'd taken from the storage unit, laying it out on the bed. Journals arranged chronologically, the trail map, the photographs, the cassette tapes. A timeline of Leonard's obsession, documented with disturbing precision. When the knock came, Rowdy checked the peephole before opening the door. Gil stood there with a dusty boombox, the kind with the dual cassette decks that had been popular in the 80s. "Batteries are fresh," he said, handing it over. "Just push play. You need me to stay? I'm fine." "But thank you," he nodded, his weathered face concerned. "You know where to find me if that changes." After he left, Rowdy sat on the bed with the boombox beside her and the first cassette in her hands. The label read, May 2010, Audio Journal. Her fingers trembled as she opened the case and loaded the tape. The mechanical click of the cassette settling into place sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. She pressed play. Static hissed for a few seconds. Then a voice emerged, older, rougher than she remembered, but unmistakably Leonard's. "This is difficult to start. I've been keeping written journals for years, but lately my hands shake too much for consistent writing. The doctors say it's stress, or maybe early arthritis. So, audio journals from now on. Today is May 3rd, 2010. I'm 58 years old, and I've been searching for Rowena, for Rowdy, for 15 years. His voice cracked slightly on her name. Rowdy felt her breath catch, her body going rigid at the sound. She hadn't heard his voice in 3 decades, but it brought back everything. The charm that had first attracted her. The edge of control that had slowly emerged. The cold anger that had driven her to flee. "I've spent thousands of dollars. I had 6 different private investigators, driven tens of thousands of miles. And I've found her. Not her exact location. She's too smart for that, moves too often. But I know she's in the northern Cascades, living off-grid. I've seen her, photographed her from a distance. She looks healthy, capable, like the wilderness has given her what I couldn't." A long pause. In the background, Rowdy could hear wind, the creak of a tree. He was recording outdoors, possibly near one of her campsites. "I don't approach her. I know I should, but I can't bring myself to do it. Because I'm afraid. Afraid she'll run again. Afraid she'll look at me with that expression I saw in her eyes that last night. Fear and disgust and a desperate need to escape. So I watch from a distance and I tell myself it's enough. That as long as I know she's safe, as long as I can check on her, that's sufficient." His voice dropped lower, more intimate, more disturbing. "But it's not sufficient. It's never sufficient. I dream about her every night. I wake up reaching for her, expecting her to be there. And every morning I remember she's gone. She left me, abandoned what we had. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how much therapy I've gone through, or how many medications I've tried, I can't let go." The tape continued. Leonard's voice weaving between confession and justification, between self-awareness and delusion. He talked about his surveillance methods, how he'd learned to track without being noticed, how he'd studied her patterns until he could predict her movements weeks in advance. "I tell myself I'm protecting her, making sure she's safe out there alone. But I know the truth. I'm monitoring her because I can't stand not knowing. Because the thought of her living a life completely separate from me is unbearable." Rowdy's hands were shaking so badly she had to set the boombox on the nightstand. The violation she'd felt reading his journals multiplied tenfold, hearing his actual voice. Listening to him describe watching her, studying her, obsessing over her from afar. The tape played on. Leonard's monologue shifting to darker territory. "Sometimes I think about approaching her. calling out her name, forcing a confrontation. Because this limbo is torture. Not together but not apart. Forever frozen in this space where I watch her live without me. But I'm afraid that if I do that, I'll lose her completely. She'll disappear again, and this time she'll be more careful. This time I might never find her. The recording ended with the sharp click of the stop button. Rowdy sat in the gathering dusk, nausea rolling through her stomach. She'd spent 10 years in the mountains believing she was free, believing she'd successfully escaped. But Leonard had been there all along, a ghost in the trees, watching her most private moments. She loaded the next tape with mechanical precision. Then the next, and the next. Hours passed as she listened to Leonard's voice documenting his obsession. His justifications growing thinner, his grip on reality becoming more tenuous. And on the final tape, dated January 2020, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Rowdy. When you finally hear this, and you will hear it, I'll make sure of that. I want you to know that I found you. I know exactly where you are now. I know your routines, your campsites, the trails you favor. And I know why you ran from me all those years ago. I understand now. I was too controlling, too possessive. I scared you. I'm sorry for that. His voice was different now, older, weaker, but also strangely calm. Resigned. But here's the thing you need to understand. You and I will never truly be separate. Even if I never speak to you again, even if I never touch you again, you're part of me. And I am part of you. That doesn't end just because you want it to. So I'm leaving you all of this, the journals, the photographs, the tapes, so you'll know. So you'll understand exactly how much I loved you, how much I still love you, and how I'll never, ever stop. The tape clicked off. Rowdy sat in the darkness of her motel room, Leonard's final words echoing in her mind, and knew with absolute certainty that she needed to find out whether he was still alive, and if not, who had decided she needed to hear his confession. The public library in Mercy Flats occupied a converted gas station at the edge of downtown, its pumps long removed and replaced with a small garden of desert plants. Rowdy had avoided it her first day in town, uncomfortable with the technology she'd need to navigate. But Leonard's final tape had changed that. She needed answers, and those answers were somewhere in public records. The librarian was a woman in her 60s named Constance, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades helping people find information. She took one look at Rowdy's uncertain expression at the computer terminal and came over immediately. First time using our catalog system. First time using any computer in about 10 years, Rowdy admitted. Constance's eyebrows rose, but she didn't comment. Well, let's get you sorted. What are you looking for? Public records. Death certificates, vital statistics, that sort of thing. Washington State. Yes. Constance guided her through the process with gentle efficiency, showing her how to access the state's vital records database, how to narrow searches by name and date range. Within minutes, Rowdy was staring at a search bar, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She typed, Leonard James Emmett. The results loaded slowly on the library's old computer. When they appeared, Rowdy felt the world tilt slightly. Death certificate, Leonard James Emmett, date of death, March 15th, 2020. Place of death, Cascade Mountains. Whatcom County, WA, cause of death, accidental fall while hiking, age at death 58 years, 5 years ago. Leonard had died 5 years ago, just 2 months after recording that final cassette tape. The date sent a chill through her. March 15th, one day after his 58th birthday. She clicked through to the full certificate, scanning the details. Body recovered by search and rescue after being reported missing by, she had to read it twice to be sure, a private investigator he'd hired to help track someone. The irony was bitter. He died while searching for her, fallen from a ridge in the same mountains where she'd hidden from him. You okay, hun? Constance had returned, concern etched in her weathered face. I'm fine. Just finding information I wasn't sure I wanted to find. Constance patted her shoulder. That's usually how it goes with these searches. Can I get you some water tea? Water would be good. While Constance went to fetch it, Rowdy printed the death certificate and then expanded her search. She typed Leonard's name into a general search engine, looking for anything else that might come up: obituaries, news articles, any trace of his life beyond the official records. She found an obituary from the Whatcom Herald. Brief and impersonal: Leonard James Emmett, 58, of Bellingham, died March 15, 2020, in a hiking accident in the North Cascades. A photographer and wilderness enthusiast, he was known for his landscape work. He is survived by no immediate family. Memorial contributions may be made to the Washington Trails Association. No immediate family. The word struck her oddly. Rowdy remembered Leonard mentioning his mother once or twice, but he'd been vague about relatives. She'd assumed he was estranged from them, the way she'd been estranged from her own small family. But no immediate family suggested something more complete. Either they'd all passed, or he'd been truly alone. She searched for Leonard's will, probate records, anything that might tell her what had happened to his estate. The search led her to the Washington State Probate Database, where she found a case file, Estate of Leonard James Emmett. Case number 2020-40847. The file indicated the estate had been valued at approximately $47,000. Photography equipment, a small savings account and life insurance. The executor was listed as a law firm, Henshaw and Associates, Seattle. Rowdy's breath caught. That was the same firm Delia had mentioned, the one managing the storage unit trust. The connections were tightening, forming a web she was only beginning to understand. She printed everything she could find, creating a file of documentation. Leonard was dead, had been dead for 5 years, which meant someone else had been maintaining the storage unit. Someone else had set up the raffle. Someone else had orchestrated her discovery of his obsession. But who? And why? Constance returned with water in a paper cup. Find what you needed. More than I needed, probably. Can you show me how to look up law firms? I need to find contact information for a specific one in Seattle. Within minutes, she had the phone number and address for Henshaw and Associates. She also had the name of the lead attorney, Marcus Henshaw, estate and trust specialist. Rowdy thanked Constance, gathered her printed documents, and walked out into the afternoon heat. She stood on the sidewalk, phone in hand, staring at the number she'd written down. Her instinct was to call, to demand answers. But she'd learned over the years that information had more value when you approached it from a position of knowledge rather than desperation. She needed to think strategically, figure out what questions to ask, what leverage she had. Back at the motel, Rowdy spread out all the evidence on the bed: Leonard's journals, the photographs, the cassette tapes, the annotated trail map, and now the death certificate and probate records. She studied them like they were a topographic map, looking for patterns, for routes through the information. Leonard had died in March 2020. The storage unit. Payments had continued for another 5 years. Before stopping in August 2025, someone had been managing his estate, maintaining his obsessive archive, keeping it preserved. The law firm was the obvious connection, but law firms didn't usually take such personal interest in their clients' storage units. They executed wills, managed trusts, distributed assets. They didn't orchestrate elaborate schemes to reunite stalking victims with evidence of their trauma, which meant someone else was involved. Someone who had access to Leonard's estate, who knew about his obsession, who decided 5 years after his death that Rowdy needed to see all of this. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She checked the peephole. Sheriff Paulson, still in uniform, hat in hand. She opened the door. "Sheriff, Ms. Elkins, got some information I thought you'd want to hear." He glanced past her at the evidence spread across the bed. "Mind if I come in?" She stepped aside, and he entered, his eyes immediately cataloguing everything she'd laid out. He didn't comment, just turned to face her with a serious expression. "Ran Leonard Emmett through the system, like I said I would. Found his death certificate. Saw you printed the same one from the library. Constance called me, wanted to make sure you were okay after doing that research. She worries. I'm fine. Did you find anything else?" "Yeah, a couple of things that don't add up." Paulson pulled out his notebook. First, the accident report from his death. Search and rescue found him at the base of a cliff in an area about 40 miles from where your storage unit map shows your most recent campsites. The PI who reported him missing said Emmett had been tracking someone, thought he was close to finding them. He was tracking me. That's my assessment. But here's the interesting part. The medical examiner's report noted some inconsistencies. Fall injuries, yes, but also some bruising and evidence that suggested he'd been in declining health before the fall. Advanced liver disease, likely from alcoholism. The ME couldn't rule out that he'd intentionally jumped rather than accidentally fell. Rowdy felt something twist in her chest. Suicide. Leonard might have killed himself, unable to cope with his obsession, his isolation, his failing health. Second thing, Paulson continued, I made some calls to Seattle PD, asked if they had any records on Emmett. Turns out he'd been flagged a few times over the years. Restraining orders from 2 different women in the 90s. Nothing recent, but a pattern of obsessive behavior. I'm not surprised. Didn't think you would be. But here's what concerns me. I also followed up on that phone call from 2 weeks ago. Got the phone company to pull records for that burner number. Only made 2 calls. One to our station, asking about you, and one to the storage facility the day before, asking about the raffle details. Someone was doing reconnaissance, making sure all the pieces were in place. Rowdy's skin prickled. You're saying whoever called is in town, watching, or was. Trail goes cold after that. Phone hasn't been used since. But yeah, someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure you won that storage unit and found what's inside it. Any way to trace who bought the phone? Paid cash at a big box store in Spokane 3 weeks ago. No ID required for burner phones. Whoever this is, they're careful. They know how to avoid leaving traces. Rowdy moved to the window, looking out at the parking lot. The sun was starting its descent, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Someone who knew about Leonard, knew about his death, knew about his storage unit full of obsession. Someone who decided she needed to confront her past. I'm going to call the law firm tomorrow, she said. See what they can tell me about Leonard's estate. Someone there has to know who's been managing the storage unit. Want me there when you make that call? She considered it. Having law enforcement present might lend weight to her questions, but it might also make the attorney defensive, less willing to share information. Not yet. Let me see what I can get on my own first. If I hit a wall, I'll ask for backup. Paulson nodded, respecting her decision. Fair enough. But Miss Elkins, Rowdy, I need you to be straight with me. Is there anyone else from your past who might have reason to do something like this? Anyone who knew about your relationship with Emmett, who might have known where to find you? Rowdy thought back through the years. She'd cut ties with everyone when she left Leonard. Friends, fellow guides, anyone who might have given him leverage to find her. She disappeared so completely that even people who wanted to help her couldn't have tracked her down. No one, she said finally. I made sure of that. Then we're dealing with someone who came into this later. Someone who discovered Emmett's obsession after the fact. Maybe someone connected to his estate or his death. Someone who decided you needed to know what he'd been doing all these years. But why? What's the end game? Paulson shook his head. That's what worries me. People don't go to this much trouble without a reason. Either they think they're helping you, giving you closure or evidence for some purpose, or they want something from you. Question is which one? After he left, Rowdy returned to the evidence on her bed. She picked up the death certificate, studying Leonard's final details. Died at 58, the same age she was now. Died searching for her in mountains that had become her sanctuary. Died alone, obsessed, unable to let go. She should feel relief. He was gone. He couldn't hurt her anymore, couldn't track her, couldn't maintain his surveillance. But instead, she felt a complicated mix of emotions. Residual fear, delayed grief for the man he could have been, anger at the years he'd stolen from her sense of safety, and underneath it all, a growing unease about whoever had picked up where he'd left off. The cassette player sat on the nightstand, the final tape still loaded. She pressed play one more time, listening to Leonard's voice, promised that she'd hear this someday. that he'd make sure of it. He'd kept that promise. Even in death, through a proxy she couldn't yet identify, he'd reached out across the years to make her confront what he'd done, to make her understand the depth of his obsession. And now Rowdy needed to understand why, and who had helped him keep that final promise. Morning came with clarity Rowdy hadn't expected. She'd spent the night organizing her thoughts, preparing questions for the law firm, building a strategy. At 8:30, she sat on the edge of the motel bed with her phone in hand and dialed the number for Henshaw and Associates. Henshaw and Associates, how may I direct your call? Marcus Henshaw, please. It's regarding the estate of Leonard Emmett. One moment, elevator music filled the line. Rowdy waited, watching dust motes drift through the morning sunlight. After nearly a minute, a man's voice came on, professional and measured. This is Marcus Henshaw. You're calling about the Emmett estate? Yes, my name is Rowdy Elkins. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully, came into possession of a storage unit that was apparently paid for through a trust managed by your firm. I'm trying to understand the circumstances. A pause. Ms. Elkins, yes, I've been expecting your call, actually. That stopped her. You have? Indeed. I received a letter several months ago from someone claiming to represent your interests, inquiring about Mr. Emmett's estate. At the time, I couldn't provide information without proper authorization. But if you're the Rowdy Elkins mentioned in, well, perhaps we should speak in person. Are you in the Seattle area? I'm in Mercy Flats, where the storage unit is located. Ah, that's several hours away. Tell you what, I have some documents here that might interest you. Items from Mr. Emmett's estate that mention you specifically. I could send them via courier, or if you're able to make the drive to Seattle, we could meet in person. Rowdy's instincts prickled. What kind of documents? A letter, primarily, and some estate paperwork that I believe you should see. Mr. Emmett's wishes regarding his property were unusual. I think it's best discussed face to face. She made a decision. I can be there tomorrow morning. What time? 10 o'clock. I'll have everything ready for you. After the call ended, Rowdy sat motionless, processing. Henshaw had been expecting her call. Someone claiming to represent her interests had contacted him months ago. The pieces were moving faster now, the web tightening, but she had one more source to check before making the drive to Seattle. She returned to the storage unit, this time bringing boxes to start packing evidence she wanted to keep. The morning heat was already building, promising another scorching day. Delia was in the office, organizing paperwork. She looked up with a tired smile. Back again. You practically live here now. Just need to finish going through everything. Figure out what's worth keeping. Take your time. Unit's yours until you decide what to do with it. Rowdy worked methodically, sorting through the remaining bins. Most of it was redundant. More photographs of the same campsites, more maps marked with the same locations. But in the final bin, tucked beneath a pile of old photography magazines, she found something new, a sealed envelope thick with contents, marked with just 2 words, for Rowdy. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The envelope was quality paper, expensive, the kind used for important documents. The seal was unbroken, the adhesive still tacky despite years in storage. Someone had placed this here recently. She opened it carefully, sliding out several pages of folded paper and a smaller, sealed envelope within. The letter was typed, single-spaced, on plain white paper. Dear Rowdy, my name is Iris Emmett. I'm Leonard's younger sister, though you probably never knew he had one. We were estranged for over 20 years, his choice, not mine. Family disagreements, old wounds, the usual reasons people stop speaking. I reconnected with Leonard in December 2019 when he called me from a hospital in Bellingham. He'd been diagnosed with advanced liver disease and was given less than 6 months to live. Faced with mortality, he wanted to make peace with the past. We spent his final months talking through old memories, old hurts. He told me everything, including about you. He confessed what he'd done. The surveillance, the obsession, the years of tracking you without your knowledge. He showed me this storage unit, all the evidence he'd compiled. And he cried, Rowdy. He cried and said he knew it was wrong, knew it was sick, but he couldn't stop himself. He said you were the only person he'd ever truly loved, and he destroyed that love through his need to possess it. In March 2020, Leonard didn't fall from that cliff by accident. He jumped. He told me the night before that he couldn't live with what he'd become, couldn't face more years of obsessing over someone who rightfully wanted nothing to do with him. He was in pain, physically and emotionally, and he made a choice. Before he died, he made me promise two things. First, that I would maintain his storage unit for 5 years, preserving everything as a record of his mistakes. Second, that after those 5 years, I would find a way to get you here, to show you everything, so you could understand what happened. Not to excuse it, he knew there was no excuse, but so you could have closure, so you could see that he eventually understood the harm he'd caused. I've been managing the trust through Marcus Henshaw. I arranged for your name to be entered in the raffle. I made sure you'd win. I know this seems manipulative, but I couldn't think of another way to fulfill my promise without forcing myself into your life directly. This felt kinder somehow, giving you the choice to engage or walk away. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking you to forgive Leonard or to understand him. I'm simply completing a promise I made to my dying brother. If you want to talk, my number is below. If you want to burn everything in that storage unit and never think about this again, I understand that too. Leonard was a troubled man who did terrible things. But in the end, he recognized that. I hope that knowledge gives you some measure of peace. Sincerely, Iris Emmett. Below the signature was a phone number with a Seattle area code. Rowdy read the letter 3 times, her mind churning. A sister. Leonard had a sister who'd reconnected with him at the end, who'd maintained this storage unit for 5 years, who'd engineered the entire raffle scheme. It made sense. It explained everything. The timing, the careful orchestration, the preservation of Leonard's obsessive archive. But something nagged at her. Small details that didn't align. She pulled out her phone and called Sheriff Paulson. Paulson, it's Rowdy. I found a letter in the storage unit. Claims to be from Leonard's sister, says she's been managing everything. Can you check something for me? Can you verify if Leonard had siblings? Give me a few minutes. I'll call you back. While she waited, Rowdy examined the envelope again. The postmark was from 6 months ago, Seattle. But the letter mentioned maintaining the storage unit for 5 years, which tracked with when the payments stopped. If Iris had been managing the trust since Leonard's death in 2020 and stopped payments in August 2025, that was 5 years, exactly. Her phone rang. Got your answer, Paulson said, and you're not going to like it. I pulled Leonard Emmett's birth certificate, vital records, everything I could find. He was an only child. No siblings, full or half. His mother, Patricia Emmett, had 1 child, Leonard James, born 1962. Father was listed as unknown. Mother died in 2008. No other children recorded. Rowdy's stomach dropped. You're sure? Completely. I even checked adoption records, foster care records, anything that might show a sister. Nothing. Leonard Emmett had no siblings. Then who the hell wrote this letter? That's the question. Someone who knows enough about Leonard to fabricate a convincing story. Someone who had access to the storage unit to place that letter recently. Someone who's been playing you from the start. After the call ended, Rowdy stared at the letter with new understanding. Iris Emmett didn't exist. The entire narrative, the deathbed reconciliation, the sisterly promise, the 5-year timeline was fabricated. Someone had created an elaborate fiction to explain away their manipulation, to make their orchestration seem benevolent. But why? What did they gain from bringing her here, from showing her Leonard's obsession? She pulled out the smaller sealed envelope that had been tucked inside the letter. It was addressed simply, additional documentation. She tore it open. Inside were photographs. Recent photographs. Of her, the images showed her at various campsites over the past 3 years. Her collecting water from a stream. Her hanging laundry between trees. Her sitting by a campfire reading. All taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, just like Leonard's old surveillance photos. But these were dated. Written on the back of each photo in neat handwriting: June 2022, September 2023, March 2024. Leonard had been dead for 5 years. These photos were taken long after his death. Someone else had been watching her. Someone had continued Leonard's surveillance. Someone who'd learned his methods, inherited his obsession, or the thought made her blood run cold. Someone who'd been working with him all along. At the bottom of the pile was one more photo, different from the rest. It showed the Mercy storage facility, taken from across the street. In the image, Rowdy stood outside Unit 37, holding one of Leonard's journals. The date on the back read, October 28th, 2025. 3 days ago, whoever was doing this had photographed her discovering the evidence, had documented her reaction, had been here in Mercy Flats, watching her process Leonard's obsession while conducting their own. Rowdy's training kicked in, overriding the panic. She scanned the storage facility, looking for vantage points, possible surveillance locations. The office had windows facing the units. The fence line offered limited visibility, but the building across the street, an old mechanic's garage that appeared abandoned, had a perfect sightline. She walked out of the unit, crossed the street, and approached the garage. The main bay door was secured with a rusted padlock, but a side door hung slightly ajar. She pushed it open, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. The garage interior was mostly empty, just oil stains on concrete and abandoned tools. But in the loft area above, accessible by a ladder, she could see recent disturbance in the dust. Someone had been up there. She climbed carefully, her boots finding purchase on worn rungs. The loft offered a perfect view through a grimy window. The storage facility, Unit 37, the parking lot. And on the floor, she found what she was looking for, a nest of evidence that someone had been conducting surveillance: empty water bottles, granola bar wrappers, a folding chair positioned at the window, and most damning, a telephoto camera lens cap, professional grade, the same kind Leonard would have used. Rowdy picked up the lens cap, turning it over in her hands. Someone had been here watching her, documenting her discovery of Leonard's obsession. Someone who knew she'd come to this town, who'd ensured she'd win that storage unit, who'd created an elaborate fiction about a concerned sister to explain away their manipulation. But who? And what did they want from her? She descended the ladder and pulled out her phone, taking photos of everything in the loft. Evidence for Sheriff Paulson. Proof that this wasn't over, that Leonard's death hadn't ended his legacy of surveillance and control. As she walked back across the street, a realization crystallized. Tomorrow, she was supposed to meet Marcus Henshaw in Seattle. He'd said he had documents for her, that someone claiming to represent her interests had contacted him months ago. That someone must be the fake Iris, the person conducting current surveillance, and they'd be expecting her in Seattle. Watching to see if she'd take the bait, Rowdy made a decision. She'd go to Seattle. She'd meet Henshaw, but she wouldn't go unprepared. She'd spent 10 years surviving in the wilderness by understanding her environment, identifying threats, and never underestimating danger. Whoever was orchestrating this had made a mistake. They'd shown their hand too early, revealed they were still watching. And now, Rowdy knew what she was dealing with. Not a ghost from her past, but a very present threat. The question was what they wanted. And she was determined to find out, on her terms, not theirs. Rowdy spent the rest of the day preparing. Not packing, she traveled light by nature, but gathering information, building strategy, ensuring she had leverage. She photographed every piece of evidence from the storage unit. The journals, the maps, the recent surveillance photos. She uploaded copies to a cloud storage account the librarian helped her set up, ensuring the evidence wouldn't disappear if something happened to the physical copies. Sheriff Paulson arrived at the motel that evening with Gil in tow. She'd called them both, explained what she'd found, and requested backup for the Seattle trip. Gil had closed the diner early, without hesitation. "You're not going alone," he'd said simply. "Not to meet someone who's been playing these kinds of games." Now the three of them sat in her motel room, the evidence spread across the bed and table. Planning their approach. "Henshaw's office is downtown Seattle," Paulson said, studying a map on his phone. Busy area, lots of foot traffic. Whoever's watching won't be able to do much in broad daylight in a professional building, unless they don't care about being seen, Rowdy countered. We don't know their end game. They've been patient this long. They might be willing to escalate. Gil leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So what's the play? We go in together, or do you meet with him while we wait outside? I go in alone, Rowdy decided, but you two stay close. If I'm not out in an hour, or if I call with a code word, you come in? What code word? Paulson asked. Rowdy thought for a moment. Summit. If I use the word summit in a sentence, something's wrong. They'd reviewed the plan twice more, identifying contingencies, backup communication methods. It felt like preparing for a difficult trail expedition, accounting for variables, ensuring everyone knew their role, building in safety measures. But underneath the tactical planning, Rowdy felt something else, anger. Clear, focused anger at being manipulated, at having her hard-won peace invaded, at someone thinking they could orchestrate her life the way Leonard had tried to control it decades ago. There's something else, she said, pulling out the final item she'd found in the storage unit. A 3-ring binder she'd discovered tucked behind the camera equipment, labeled simply documentation. She opened it on the table. Inside were printed pages, professionally formatted, with photographs and typed notes. A surveillance report, the kind a private investigator might compile for a client. I found this in the storage unit, she said. It's dated from the last 3 years. Someone hired a PI to track me after Leonard died. Paulson flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. This is detailed. GPS coordinates of your campsites. Estimates of your supply runs, analysis of your movement patterns. They were building a profile, same as Leonard did, Rowdy said, but more methodical, more professional. And look at the client code. She pointed to the header on each page. Client IR 2021. IR, Gil said. Iris, the fake sister? That's my guess. Whoever's pretending to be Iris hired this investigator in 2021. A year after Leonard died. They've been tracking me for 4 years, gathering intelligence, planning whatever this is. Paulson pulled out his notebook. The PI firm that compiled this, it's listed here in the footer. Cascade Investigations, Bellingham. I can make some calls, see what they'll tell me about their client. They won't break confidentiality, Rowdy said. Not officially, but I've got contacts who owe me favors. Might be able to get something useful. The night passed slowly. Rowdy tried to sleep, but managed only a few hours of restless dozing, her mind cycling through possibilities. Who had known Leonard well enough to continue his work? Who had access to his storage unit after his death? Who had the resources to hire private investigators and orchestrate elaborate schemes? At 5:30, she gave up on sleep and drove to Gil's diner. He was already there prepping for the morning rush. But he poured her coffee and made eggs without comment on her haggard appearance. Been thinking about this all night, he said, sliding a plate across the counter. About what kind of person does something like this. And I keep coming back to one thing. They want something from you. What could I possibly have that they'd want? Maybe it's not about having. Maybe it's about doing. They've gone to a lot of trouble to bring you here. Show you Leonard's obsession, make you confront your past. That suggests they want you to react a certain way, to do something specific. Rowdy considered this. Like what? Can't say for sure, but my guess, they want you to understand something, or confess something, or maybe... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe they want you to forgive Leonard, to see him as human, complicated, worthy of understanding despite what he did. That's twisted. Yeah. But people do twisted things when they're grieving, or when they've built up someone in their mind as more important than they were. Could be you're dealing with someone who loved Leonard, who can't accept that he was a stalker and an abuser. So they've convinced themselves that if they just show you enough, you'll see him the way they do. The psychology made uncomfortable sense. Rowdy had met people like that in her guiding days. Individuals who'd constructed elaborate narratives to justify someone else's behavior, who couldn't accept uncomfortable truths about people they cared for. They left for Seattle at 7, taking Paulson's personal vehicle, an unmarked SUV that wouldn't scream law enforcement. The drive took just under 4 hours, winding through mountain passes and descending into the urban sprawl of the Puget Sound. Rowdy watched the landscape change through the window, feeling increasingly exposed as trees gave way to buildings and solitude gave way to crowds. Seattle was overwhelming after weeks in the desert and years in the mountains. The noise, the traffic, the sheer density of people made her skin crawl. She focused on breathing steadily, reminding herself this was temporary, that she could return to the quiet when this was done. Henshaw and Associates occupied the 8th floor of a glass and steel building downtown. The lobby was all polished marble and modern art, the kind of calculated professionalism that spoke of expensive, billable hours. Rowdy felt acutely out of place in her canvas pants and worn flannel, but she kept her spine straight and her expression neutral. "I'll be right here," Paulson said, gesturing to a coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the building entrance. "Phone on, ready to move." Gil squeezed her shoulder. "You got this." The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt interminable. Rowdy counted breaths, centering herself the way she did before difficult climbs. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area that smelled like leather and expensive coffee. "Rowdy Elkins for Marcus Henshaw," she told the receptionist. "He's expecting you. Conference room B, down the hall on the right." Marcus Henshaw was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of careful grooming that came from professional necessity. He stood when she entered, extending his hand. "Ms. Elkins, thank you for making the drive." His handshake was firm but not aggressive. "Please have a seat." "Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Water's fine." He poured from a carafe on the sideboard, then settled across from her with a leather portfolio. "I appreciate you coming in person. What I have to discuss is delicate. I'm listening. First, I need to confirm your identity." He slid a form across the table. "If you could provide your driver's license or state ID and sign here acknowledging you're Rowdy Elkins, formerly known as Rowdy Elkins." "Yes, that's me." She provided her ID, signed the form. Henshaw studied her signature, compared it to something in his portfolio, then nodded. "Excellent. Now, to be clear, I've been managing Leonard Emmett's estate since his death in 2020. The estate was relatively simple. No heirs, modest assets, clear instructions in his will. What complicated matters was a trust he'd set up in 2009, specifically to maintain a storage unit in Mercy Flats, the unit I just won. Precisely. The trust was funded with enough money to cover 15 years of storage payments, with specific instructions that at the end of that period, the unit should be, and I'm quoting here, made available to Rowdy Elkins through whatever means necessary. Rowdy's hands tightened on the water glass. "Leonard set this up. Not some sister. Leonard had no siblings. I verified that when executing his estate. There's no Iris Emmett, but..." Henshaw opened his portfolio, removing a document. "I did receive a letter 6 months ago from someone claiming to be Leonard's representative. The letter explained that they were fulfilling his final wishes by arranging for you to receive the storage unit. They provided detailed instructions on how to ensure you'd win the raffle, including depositing money in donation cans in your name at locations you'd likely visit. Do you have the letter?" He slid it across the table. The letterhead read, "Estate Services, Pacific Northwest," with no address listed. The signature was illegible, but the content matched what Rowdy had found in the storage unit. Claims about Leonard's final wishes, instructions for the raffle, justification for the manipulation. "Did you verify who sent this?" she asked. "I tried." The return address was a P.O. box in Bellingham that turned out to be rented under a false name. The email address bounced. "Whoever sent this covered their tracks." Henshaw leaned forward. "Ms. Elkins, I'm an attorney. I deal with eccentric wills and complicated estates regularly. But this one has bothered me from the start. The level of orchestration, the manipulation involved, it crossed ethical lines. I only went along with it because technically I was fulfilling the trust's legal requirements. The trust did mandate that the storage unit contents reach you, but Leonard didn't write that letter 6 months ago. He's been dead for 5 years, correct? Which means someone else is carrying out what they believe to be his wishes, or using his wishes as justification for their own agenda. Henshaw pulled out another document. There's one more thing. The trust had a provision I didn't understand until now. It included funding for a private investigator's services, to be used at the discretion of the trustee. I managed the trust's finances, but someone else had authorization to direct those funds. To hire a PI to track me. I didn't know that's what the funds were used for until you mentioned surveillance. The invoices just listed Field Research Services. If I'd known, he looked genuinely troubled, I would have questioned it more aggressively. Rowdy studied him, evaluating his sincerity. He seemed legitimate, caught in a situation he didn't fully understand. But he also had information she needed, who had authorization to direct those funds. The trust documents listed a secondary administrator, activated upon Leonard's death. Someone with legal power of attorney to act on behalf of the trust. He slid one final document across the table. The name listed is Stella Carver. Ring any bells? Stella Carver. Rowdy turned the name over in her mind, searching her memory. She'd known many people in her trail guiding days, had crossed paths with hundreds of hikers over the years. But the name meant nothing, never heard of her. Neither had I until I started digging deeper this morning after your call. Stella Carver has been a ghost in this case. Name on legal documents, but no physical presence. I tried to contact her when executing the trust, but every address was defunct, every phone number disconnected. It's like she exists only on paper, or she's using a false identity. That was my conclusion. Which raises the question, if Stella Carver isn't real, who is she really? And why would Leonard name her in his trust documents? Before Rowdy could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from Paulson. Woman just entered the building. Late 50s, watching the elevators. Think you've got company. Rowdy's pulse quickened. She showed Henshaw the text. Someone's here. Someone who knew I'd be meeting with you. Henshaw's professional calm cracked slightly. Do you think? I think whoever's been orchestrating this wants to make contact. And they chose now, when I'm away from my support system, in an unfamiliar place. She stood, moving to the conference room door. Is there another exit from this floor? Service stairs at the end of the hall, past the kitchen. They go down to the parking garage. Good. I need you to do something for me. She pulled out her phone, quickly typing. I'm sending you copies of everything I've found. Photos, documents, recordings. If something happens to me, that evidence goes to Sheriff Paulson in Mercy Flats. Understand? Ms. Elkins, maybe we should call building security. No. Whoever this is has been careful to avoid direct confrontation. They won't do anything dangerous in a public place. But I need to see them. I need to know who's been pulling the strings. She opened the conference room door carefully, scanning the hallway. Empty. The reception area was visible through glass walls. She could see the receptionist at her desk, a man waiting with a briefcase, and near the elevator bank. A woman. The woman was late 50s or early 60s, with iron-grey hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore hiking pants and a worn jacket, the kind of clothes that spoke of outdoor experience. She stood with her back to the elevators, watching the hallway to the conference rooms with an intensity that was palpable even from a distance. Rowdy recognized the posture, the alertness, the way the woman's eyes scanned methodically. It was the stance of someone who'd spent time in the wilderness, who'd learned to watch for threats and opportunities. It was the stance of someone very much like herself. The woman's gaze locked onto Rowdy through the glass. For a moment, neither moved. Then the woman raised one hand slowly, palm out, in a gesture that wasn't quite a wave and wasn't quite a surrender. And Rowdy knew, with absolute certainty, that she was finally about to meet the person who'd been watching from the shadows, orchestrating every move, carrying forward Leonard's obsession into the present day. The question was whether she was ready for the answers she'd been seeking. Rowdy stepped into the reception area, her hand hovering near her phone, where Paulson was one quick call away. The woman watched her approach with an expression that was difficult to read, not threatening, but intensely focused. Up close, Rowdy could see the weathering on her face, the scars on her hands, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd spent significant time outdoors. "You're Rowdy," the woman said. "Not a question." Her voice was rough, like Rowdy's own, eroded by years of disuse and wind. "And you're the person who's been orchestrating all of this." The woman glanced at the receptionist, who was pretending not to listen while clearly absorbing every word. "Not here. There's a park 2 blocks west. Meet me there in 5 minutes. Come alone or don't come at all. I'm not armed. I'm not dangerous. I just need to explain something to you, face to face, without lawyers or law enforcement complicating things. 5 minutes. Your choice." The woman walked to the elevators and pressed the button. The doors opened immediately and she stepped inside, her eyes holding Rowdy's until the doors closed between them. Rowdy pulled out her phone. "Texting Paulson. Woman wants to meet at park 2 blocks west. I'm going. Follow but stay back." His response came immediately. "Absolutely not. Too dangerous." She typed back, "This is why I came. Need answers. We'll keep phone on, open line." Before he could argue, she called his number and tucked the phone into her shirt pocket. Microphone pointed out. Then she took the next elevator down, her heart hammering against her ribs. The park was small, squeezed between office buildings, an urban green space with benches and a fountain that probably soothed office workers on lunch breaks. The woman sat on a bench near the fountain, hands visible, posture non-threatening. Rowdy approached from an angle that let her see anyone who might be watching, any potential backup the woman might have hidden. But the park appeared, empty except for a mother with a stroller on the far side and a man eating lunch on another bench. "You came," the woman said as Rowdy sat down, maintaining a careful distance between them. "You've gone to a lot of trouble. Figured I should at least hear what you have to say. My name is Stella Carver, though that's not the name I was born with." She turned to face Rowdy fully. "I'm Leonard Emmett's ex-wife. We were married for 3 years in the late 80s. Divorced in 1991, and everything you experienced with him, I experienced first." The words hit like a physical blow. Rowdy stared at this woman, seeing similarities in their builds, their weathered features, their careful wariness. They could have been sisters, cut from the same cloth of survival. He never mentioned being married. No, he wouldn't have. Part of Leonard's pattern was to erase previous relationships, to make each new woman think she was the only one who'd ever mattered. Made the obsession feel more special, more unique. But it wasn't. I've tracked at least 4 women over the years who he fixated on the same way. 4. Rowdy's voice came out flat. You, me, and 2 others that I know of. There might be more. Stella pulled a worn photograph from her jacket pocket and handed it over. It showed a much younger version of herself, maybe 30 years old, standing next to Leonard. Her smile was strained. His arm around her shoulders was possessive. The photograph was identical in composition to the one Rowdy had found in the storage unit. Same pose, same dynamic. Like Leonard had been following a script he'd perfected over decades. "He did this to all of us," Stella continued. "The surveillance, the documentation, the slow tightening of control. With me, it started sweet. He was attentive, thoughtful, seemed to really see me. But within months, it shifted. He needed to know where I was every minute, who I talked to, what I was thinking. When I tried to leave the first time, Her voice caught. She took a breath, steadying herself. He showed me photographs he'd taken of me sleeping. Proof that he could get to me any time, anywhere. When I finally did leave, got a restraining order, he stalked me for 3 years. Followed me across 2 states. I had to disappear completely, change my name, build a new life in hiding, like I did. Exactly like you did. When I learned about Leonard's death 5 years ago, I thought I was finally free. But then I found out about his storage units, yes, plural. He had 3 of them in different cities, all full of documentation about his obsessions. I've spent 5 years tracking down the women he hurt, trying to give them closure. Rowdy's mind reeled. The other 2 women, one committed suicide in 2003. She left a note mentioning a man who'd been following her for years. I found her through old police reports. The other managed to disappear successfully. I never found her, and I hope she's living peacefully somewhere Leonard never reached. And me? You I found through his storage unit in Mercy Flats. It was the most extensive of all his archives. Hundreds of photographs, decades of journals. You were his longest obsession. He tracked you for 25 years, Rowdy. From the day you met until the day he died. The words should have shocked her, but somehow they didn't. She'd suspected as much from the evidence. Hearing it confirmed just made it real in a way that documentation couldn't. So you orchestrated everything. The trust, the raffle, the fake letter from Iris. Yes, I needed you to see the full scope of what he did. Not because I thought you'd doubt your own memories. Survivors know what they experienced, but because sometimes seeing the physical evidence helps, validates the fear you felt. Proves you weren't overreacting or being paranoid. You were right to run. You were right to stay hidden. You had no right, I know. Stella's voice was firm, but not defensive. I crossed lines. I manipulated you. I hired investigators to find you, then to track you just long enough to know you were safe. I orchestrated your discovery of Leonard's obsession in a controlled way. All of that was wrong, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? Stella stood, moving to the fountain's edge. I'm asking if you want to help me make sure Leonard's story and our stories get told. Not for sympathy, not for revenge, but so other women know what this pattern looks like. Know that if a man seems too perfect, too attentive, too focused on them, that might not be love. That might be the beginning of obsession. Rowdy rose slowly, processing this. You want to go public. I've been documenting everything for 5 years, building a complete picture of Leonard's pattern across multiple victims. With your permission, I'd like to include your story. Change names if you want, but show the evidence. The surveillance photos, the journals, the tapes. Make it undeniable. And if I say no, then I destroy everything related to you. The storage unit contents, the surveillance reports, all of it. You go back to your mountains, and we never speak again. Stella met her eyes. But I hope you'll say yes. Because women like us, we survive in silence. And silence protects men like Leonard. Rowdy stood at the fountain's edge, watching water cascade over sculpted stone. Behind her, she could sense Paulson and Gill maintaining their watch from a distance, ready to intervene if needed. But this moment, this decision, was hers alone. There's more you need to see, Stella said quietly, before you decide. Something Leonard left behind that I think was meant as insurance. From her jacket's inner pocket, she withdrew a safety deposit box key, small and brass, with a number stamped on its side. This was in his storage unit in Bellingham, the one I found first. It took me 3 years to figure out which bank it belonged to. When I finally accessed the box last year, I understood why he'd hidden it so carefully. What's in it? Photographs. Not of his victims, of himself. Evidence of what he did, documented like he was building a case against himself. And a handwritten confession, sealed and notarized, explaining his pattern of obsession and naming names. Including yours, Rowdy's breath caught. Why would he do that? I've thought about this a lot. My best guess? Guilt, or maybe a twisted form of self-aggrandizement. He wanted to be remembered, studied, understood. Serial obsessives often have this need to document their compulsions. But whatever his reasoning, he left us proof. Irrefutable evidence that can't be explained away or dismissed. You have it? The contents of the box? Copies. The originals are still in the bank, as backup. I'll show you everything, right now if you want. But first, Stella's expression shifted, becoming more vulnerable. I need to tell you something else. Something about why I've spent 5 years on this. She sat back down on the bench, and after a moment Rowdy joined her. When Leonard stalked me, when I was living in fear, constantly looking over my shoulder, I tried to get help. I went to police. I filed restraining orders. I told friends, family, anyone who'd listen. And you know what happened? Nothing. The restraining order was just paper. The police said they couldn't do anything until he actually hurt me. My friends suggested I was overreacting, that maybe I should just talk to him, clear the air, her hands clenched into fists. One night I woke up to find he'd broken into my apartment. He was sitting in a chair watching me sleep, taking photographs. I screamed. Neighbors called the police. When they arrived, he was calm, apologetic, said we'd had a fight and he'd come to apologize, that I'd given him a key months ago. They believed him, told me to work it out internally or go to civil court. I'm sorry, Rowdy said, the words feeling insufficient but necessary. The point is, I disappeared because the system failed me. Just like you disappeared because you knew no one would protect you effectively. And the woman who died in 2003, she'd also filed multiple reports. It's in the records Leonard kept. He documented not just his surveillance, but his victims' failed attempts to get help. Stella turned to face Rowdy fully. If we go public with this, with all the evidence, the pattern, the proof, maybe the next woman who says, I'm being stalked, will be believed. Maybe the next survivor won't have to choose between staying and fighting a system that doesn't work, or disappearing into the wilderness for a decade. The weight of it settled over Rowdy. This wasn't just about her story or Stella's story. It was about every woman who'd come before and every woman who'd come after. About changing the narrative from she overreacted to he was dangerous. What would it involve? Rowdy asked carefully. If I agreed. A book, maybe, or a podcast, or just submitting all the evidence to journalists who specialize in investigative reporting. We control how it's told, what names are used, what details are shared. I've already contacted a women's safety organization that would help us present it properly, with support services and context. And the surveillance you did of me? How do you explain that to make it seem ethical? Stella didn't flinch from the question. I can't make it seem ethical. It wasn't. I used Leonard's methods to track you, which makes me complicit in the very behavior I'm trying to expose. But I can own that. I can admit I made choices that crossed lines because I was desperate to find all his victims and make sure they were safe. Doesn't make it right, just makes it honest. The fountain burbled beside them. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed. The city continued its rhythms, indifferent to the weight of the decision being made in this small pocket of green. Rowdy thought about the 10 years she'd spent in the mountains, the peace she'd found there, the life she'd built, small and solitary but hers. Going public would end that anonymity, would invite scrutiny and attention she'd spent a decade avoiding, but it would also mean Leonard couldn't be romanticized. Couldn't be remembered as just an eccentric photographer with a broken heart. It would mean the truth, documented, undeniable, would be part of the record. She thought about the other women, the one who'd died, the one who'd managed to disappear, the future women who might cross paths with men like Leonard, who might need language to describe what was happening to them, evidence that they weren't crazy or paranoid. I need time, Rowdy said finally. This isn't a decision I can make in a park in the middle of the city while my friends are watching from coffee shops. I understand, but I need an answer within a week. The storage unit in Mercy Flats is yours now. Legally, you won it. You can keep everything, destroy everything, or let me include it in the documentation. But I won't move forward without your consent. You mean that? I do. I've crossed enough lines. This one I won't cross. Your story is yours. I'm just asking for permission to help tell it. Stella stood, reaching into her pocket one more time. She handed Rowdy a card with a phone number and email address. When you're ready to talk, reach out. If I don't hear from you by next Friday, I'll destroy all the copies I have of your information. You'll never hear from me again. And if I say yes, then we work together to make sure what Leonard did matters. Not as a love story gone wrong, not as a tragic tale of obsession, but as a clear pattern of abuse and stalking that needs to be recognized and stopped. Rowdy took the card, tucking it into her pocket. The key, the safety deposit box. Can I see what's in it before I decide? Stella pulled out her phone, opening a secure folder. I photographed everything. Here, read his confession. See the evidence. Then decide if you want the world to see it too. She handed over the phone, and Rowdy began scrolling through images. Leonard's handwriting, cramped and precise, filling page after page of confession. Photographs of him at various ages, conducting surveillance, documenting his methods. And finally, a notarized statement dated 2019, 1 year before his death. I, Leonard James Emmett, being of sound mind, confess to a pattern of obsessive behavior toward multiple women over a period of 30 years. I have stalked, surveilled, and psychologically tormented these individuals. This document serves as acknowledgement of my actions and proof that my victims' fears were valid and justified. I'm not seeking forgiveness. I'm simply ensuring the truth is documented. Below it, he'd listed names. Rowdy's was third on the list. She handed the phone back, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside. I'll give you an answer by Friday. But Stella, if I do this, we do it right. Full context, full honesty, including your surveillance of me. No sanitizing the uncomfortable parts. Agreed. They stood in the small park, two survivors of the same man's obsession, connected by trauma they'd never asked for, but might now choose to transform into something meaningful. Rowdy extended her hand, and Stella took it. The handshake was firm, brief, laden with understanding that didn't require words. Friday, Rowdy said. Friday, Stella confirmed. Then she walked away, disappearing into the city's flow of pedestrians and traffic, leaving Rowdy with the weight of a decision that would determine not just her future, but potentially the safety of women she'd never meet. 2 weeks later, Rowdy stood at the edge of a trail just outside Mercy Flats, watching morning light paint the desert hills in shades of copper and gold. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, carrying scents of sage and dust. In her hand, she held a new topographic map, unmarked, pristine, full of potential routes not yet explored. She'd made her decision 3 days after returning from Seattle, called Stella from Gil's Diner, with Paulson present as witness, and said yes. Yes to telling her story. Yes to including Leonard's documentation. Yes to being part of a larger narrative about obsession, stalking, and survival, but also yes to something else. Yes to staying. The storage unit had been sorted, most of its contents donated to a women's shelter in Spokane. Rowdy kept only what was necessary for the documentation project: select journals, key photographs, the cassette tapes. The rest, the camping equipment, the tools, Leonard's personal effects, went to people who could use them without the burden of their history. Attorney Henshaw had confirmed that the modest estate Leonard left actually existed. $47,000, accumulated from photography equipment sales and a small life insurance policy. No will had specifically named Rowdy, but as the subject of his documented obsession and the intended recipient of his storage unit, she was considered a rightful claimant in the eyes of probate law. She'd accepted it. Not as inheritance, she wanted nothing from Leonard, but as restitution, money to fund a new beginning, to build something different from what she'd been. Running toward and running from, Gil had offered her seasonal work, guiding, tours for the small but growing tourism, trade in Mercy Flats, spring through fall. She'd lead groups into the nearby wilderness areas, teaching the skills she'd honed over decades. Winter months, she'd have time to work on the documentation project with Stella, to ensure their stories were told with care and accuracy. Town could use someone with your experience. Gil had said over breakfast one morning, and you could use a place that isn't defined by what you're running from. He was right. The mountains had been refuge, but they'd also been isolation. A self-imposed exile that had kept her safe, but also kept her from living anything resembling a full life. At 58, she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of letting Leonard's ghost dictate where she could and couldn't build a home. Sheriff Paulson had helped her find a small rental house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it had a porch facing west toward the mountains and enough space for her simple needs. She'd spent a week making it livable, bringing in her few possessions from the mountain camp she'd dismantled. Letting go of that camp had been harder than she'd expected. She'd stood in the clearing where her tarp had been stretched, where she'd spent countless nights under stars and felt the weight of a decade of solitude lifting. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to let her imagine something different. Delia had become an unexpected friend, stopping by the house with casseroles and conversation, never prying, but always present. The women had an understanding, shaped by Delia's concerns about her own daughters and Rowdy's hard-won knowledge about safety and threat assessment. "You'll teach them," Delia had said one evening, "how to see the signs, how to trust their instincts, how to run if they need to and fight if they can't."